classroom. As soon as I knew it was all clear, I popped my head up to see what Miss G had put on my desk. I was surprised to find that she had put a little book on my desk. Now, Miss G knew how much I loved to read, and she knew how much I loved poetry. And guess what? She had put a little book of poems on my desk. As I looked through it, I realized this was no ordinary book of poems. This was a book of poems by my favorite poet, Langston Hughes. The book was called The Dream Keeper. I opened that little blue book, and I just fell in love. Now, why? Because this was the first time inside of a classroom that I had held a book of poems or any other book that had pictures in it. Pictures of people who looked like me. People who had eyes like mine and lips like mine. People who looked out at me with love in their eyes, just like my mama and my daddy, just like the elders in my personal village. When I read the words, they had that swing and sway. They had the music and the rhythm. They had a dance-like feeling that spoke to my heart and my soul. The words actually had the same kind of cadence of the words I heard at home and in my neighborhood and at church. Mercy. Now, David White, the poet that I mentioned earlier, says, "There's no place like the house of belonging." I'm going to say that again. There is no place like the house of belonging. Can I just tell you something? He is absolutely right. This little blue book of poems called The Dream Keeper was my house. It was filled with peeps from my family, peeps from my personal village, my village of belonging. What difference can a poem make? Here's the difference. Miss G thought she had given me a book of poems, but what she really gave me was a long drink of water for my withered little soul. What she really gave me was a lifeline to hold on to as I was swirling around and around in that big old sea of self-doubt, as I was sinking in the sea of loneliness. She gave me a healthy dose of oxygen, a special kind of CPR that saved my life. What difference can a poem make? For some poets, for some readers, for some listeners, poems are instruments for healing. When I work with students in the schools, I often use poetry as a way to help them find their own true voice and then to explore the layers of their voice. As a teenager, your job, your primary preoccupation and official occupation is to discover who you really are, to find out for yourself what you believe, to find out for yourself what you stand for, what you value. Now, sometimes I use poetry to help students discover more about themselves as a pathway, as a bridge to explore their various identities and ways of making sense in a very complex world. I also use poems to help them slow down so they can pay attention to the world around them. Not the virtual world of social media. I'm talking about the real world. The real world that is all around them. The real world that has real people with real problems just like they do, right? And also the world that has real people who are filled with love in their hearts. What difference can a poem make? For young people, poetry is the fastest way to move from not knowing who you are to knowing who you are. Poetry is a way to really pay attention to the world inside of you. And it's the same way for adults. A few months ago, I was talking to a cohort of executives, talking with them about one of my favorite topics, leadership, looking through the lens of legacy. Now, during my time with that cohort of execs, I led them in a session where they could explore their values, explore their deeply held beliefs about leadership and the significance of their work. After the session, a gentleman came up and introduced himself. He said he was the founder and executive director of a nonprofit that provided programs and services for at-risk youth. He then asked if I recognized him. I said, no. Should I? He said, well, when we met the first time you were in my classroom, you were there as part of a big poetry project. He then went on to remind me that I had spent a week with his class as an artist in residence. He shared how my poetry had touched him and his students and what a difference that had made in his classroom. Now, in his new role, he's using the arts, visual art, music, movement, and poetry to engage youth in his community. And he asked if he could use some of my poetry as part of that project. Now, I share all of this with you not to pat myself on the back or to impress you. I share it to impress upon you the power of poetry to make a difference in your life. So let me ask you that question again. What difference can a poem make? Well, for this executive director, he not only works in his own local community, he connects students, at-risk youth in his community with communities all over the world. Because you know what? There are at-risk youth in every single continent on the planet. What difference can a poem make? A poem could be a bridge, right? In my work with doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers, we turn to poetry to help them slow down and pay attention to their inner life. Now, you can just imagine how hectic life is in the emergency room, in the ER, right? Not just once in a while, like when you have to take your daughter or son to the hospital because they stuck something in their ear or they swallowed something they never should have put in their mouths in the first place. This is life in the ER because it's your job. This is your world every single day. Well, can you imagine going into an ER where the doctors aren't talking to the nurses aren't talking to the doctors, and the folks on the night shift can't seem to get along with the folks on the day shift? Sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? Well, that world is why folks call on me as a consultant or as a coach. They need help, and they need it fast. And they don't really know how to help themselves. I have to pinch myself because I get to work with folks who need the kind of CPR that only poetry can provide. We might begin our session with the sounds of music to help folks get in harmony with themselves, to help them slow down and pay attention to the rhythm that is closer to their own natural rhythm versus that fast-paced, intense music of a typical emergency room, right? Kind of like metallic rock. Okay, now the music I'm talking about is Sweet Honey. It's Jasmine or Magnificent Magnolia. Okay, it's that fragrance found in the music, the tempo, the flow of language. It's been said that poetry is the best words in the best order. Let me tell you something. The right poem at the right time with the right people is a small dose of what matters. It's a small dose of what makes a difference. Just like a close friend, the kind of close friend you can call at 3 a.m. in the morning. Yes, right? And they don't hang up on you. The right poem at the right time with the right people can be the difference that makes all the difference. Poetry has the power to awaken us, to shake us up, to shape us up, to entertain us, to educate us, to liberate us, to heal us, to build bridges where before there was only a loose array of stones along the road. Poetry also has the power to reimagine the unimaginable, to make tangible the intangible, to revisit history and arrest us with its industrious, divine, and mysterious ways. Now, before I close today's podcast, I want to give a special shout out to a family of poets called Cave Canem. Cave Canem. It's spelled C-A-V-E, like cave, okay? Canem, C-A-N-E-M. Look them up. Cave Canem. It's Latin, okay? And to call Cave Canem an organization would be to tell only part of their glorious story, to share only one of its many, many facets. Cave Canem is a collective of poets and writers of the African diaspora. It was founded in 1996, and since then they have rewritten the book, so to speak. Okay? Because of this amazing collective, we now have African American poets being recognized as U.S. Poet Laureates. We now have African American poets winning major prizes and fellowships, like the Lamont Prize awarded by the American Academy of Poets, like the Guggenheim Fellowship, yes, even like the Pulitzer Prize. Right? Now, I have the good fortune of being a poetry fellow with this amazing collective called Cave Canem. And in its relatively short history, it has effectively changed the face, and dare I say, changed the very complexion of poetry in the U.S. and beyond. Because of this incredible organization, we now have more African American poets and writers at the table. More of them at the table means that they have more decision-making authority, which means that they can contribute to lifting up the voices of more poets and writers of the African diaspora and beyond. Okay? Now, this phenomenon has quickened the pace of what was already occurring before the founding of Cave Canem, but I'm telling you, it was at a pace that can only be described as glacial. Okay? Talk about transformation. Talk about transformation. Talk about the power of poetry. Now, before I close today, I want to share a poem with you. It's one of my favorites, and by my favorite poet, Langston Hughes. And it's called Mother to Son. I want to dedicate this poem to a poet who is near and dear to me, and that's my mom. Now, I bet you didn't know my mom's a poet. Well, she doesn't write poems in the same way that I do, but she's a poet just the same. For as long as I've known her, my mom has lived her life as a poem. And now at the threshold of her 9th decade, she continues to do just that. So, Mother, to the person who has made an incredible and indelible difference in my life, this poem, which is all about making your life count, this poem is for you.